Now, let me share a story with you. One of our top producers in this group shared, and it's not my story or our story. We got this from the field, and if you saw this guy's run rate in his business, you'd want a piece of it. He explained how he sold annuities because they're fairly complex to the average Joe. He said, "This is how I explain it and how I deal with my clients because I want them to understand the general concept of annuities and especially the tax and income advantages." He says, "Well, I have a client sitting in front of me, and what I do is this. I tell them, imagine this. Imagine you look out in your backyard and imagine what you want your backyard to look like in 20 years from now. Tell me what that's like." And they respond back and say, "Well, maybe I want a nice shaded oak tree or gazebo or a fire pit. Maybe I want a little line of apple trees over here." And I say, "Oh, that's great. So imagine what you do is you go out and you buy some small trees, maybe some apple trees, and you plant them in your yard because this is where you want them to grow over the next 20 years. And so you do this because you have a vision of what this is going to look like down the road. And guess what happens? You watch these things start to grow. Now, imagine all of a sudden around the middle of April, this guy shows up at your front door unannounced, and he has a little white suit on, and he has a little chainsaw, and it's powered up and ready to go, and he has a little sign on it that says IRS. He says, "I'm here to trim your trees." And you say, "Well, what do you mean? They're just starting to grow. I just planted them a year ago. They don't need any trimming." And he says, "Well, you can't just let your trees grow like that in the back. I'm sorry, it's my job. I got to do it. Every year, it's my responsibility to come in here and trim the trees and take between 30 and 40% of the branches off those trees." And sure enough, this little guy goes around the back of the house and does his job and nearly kills the trees. Everybody knows that trimming too much off at once damages the tree, but he doesn't care. They aren't his trees. And another year goes by and the same thing happens again. How in the world are you ever going to get this tree to grow in your backyard when they keep cutting a third of it back every single year? And he says, "Now I tell my clients, imagine that you started this whole entire process by not planting ordinary trees, but by planting annuities. Planting the annuity, you watch these trees grow year after year. And on April 15th, when the IRS knocks on the door and says, 'I'm here to trim those trees,' and it has this little saw up, and you say, 'My backyard's filled with annuities. You need to move on.'" "Is that right?" he says with a frown. "Well, okay, I gotta go. I guess I'll go over to the neighbor's house instead." And off he goes. Now, here's an even cooler thing. You can take parts of your healthy growing annuities and make more trees out of them. You can even get fruit and apples. That's the income that these trees produce every single year. So your trees grow bigger and healthier, and they bear fruit every single year. Now, this is the story he uses with the clients. And you think this might be simple and hokey and kind of stupid, but let me just say this one more time. His annuity and managed account production is in the millions. He has another story to sell managed accounts. He's a master at story selling. So he doesn't have just two stories, he has a whole library. And he's a master of making the unknown known by using the familiar. It's what he does, and he does it really well. Now, I talked about a couple of ways to do story selling. That's one way of narrating these different illustrations.